Okay, so we're going to talk about modern theories of macroeconomics. Kind of two groups here in these theories. One is the two things that come out of the neoclassical synthesis. So people who are part of this neoclassical synthesis either refer to themselves as new classical economists or new Keynesian economists. And we'll talk about both those theories. Then there are maybe dozens of other theories out there, and we'll talk about a couple of them just for fun. So, if we're new classical, we believe, like classical economists, that markets always work, that markets give us the right answer, that we can trust markets both in the short run and the long run. They believe in something called rational expectations, and they believe in something called supply shocks. So, what do we mean by rational expectations? Well, remember that Keynes' idea of expectations are that we don't know anything, and expectations make life difficult for us because it means there are times when we simply can't have any reasonable conception of what's going to happen in the future. Rational expectation says that people understand the way things work, that economic theory is actually correct, and if you put those things together, then expectations are going to match reality. Not in the sense that people can predict that the stock market's going to be some value 10 years from now, but in the sense that they can, if there's a 50-50 chance of A happening and a 50-50 chance of B happening, that people understand that there's this 50-50 chance of A and B happening, and they understand what that means. And so they base their expectations on a reasonable understanding based on economic theory of what's going to happen. All right, so I'm a new classical. I have to explain why recessions happen. That's the problem that classical economics had, is that nobody really trusted it to explain things like Great Depressions. New classicals believe in something called real business cycles. And real business cycles usually come from something called a supply shock. It comes from some disruption on the supply side of the economy. That's why they're real. It means that maybe you have a natural disaster or even the introduction of a new technology. You have computers. What happens when we have computers? Well, some people are going to lose their jobs. People were doing stuff by hand. They were doing stuff on paper. Those people are going to lose their jobs. Those people who just lost their jobs are not going to be the computer programmers who all of a sudden get jobs because the computer business is expanding. And so we're going to have a transition in the labor market. There's going to take time for the labor market to adjust to this shock, and maybe you have a recession because of that. The counterpoint to this is they also believe then that there's nothing really that the government can do about it, that there's a policy ineffectiveness proposition that by the nature of what they do and by the fact that Wall Street is out there always playing with the markets to try to deal with interest rates and other things, that there's really nothing the government can do about all this. So new Keynesians believe in market failure. New Keynesians believe that the classical economics is right, but that in the long run, but then in the short run, wages and prices are sticky. Very technical term, sticky. Wages and prices are sticky, and therefore markets don't get to equilibrium right when they should. So why is that? So first, prices are sticky for two simple reasons. One is some businesses have to print up their prices and make a menu and do this other stuff, and it's expensive, and so they're not going to change their prices every day because it's too expensive. It costs them money. Modern world, we know Amazon changes prices of everything by the millisecond. So over time, this is certainly less and less an issue. More interesting, though, is what we've learned from behavioral economists, and what they've taught us is that consumers don't like it when price changes. If you will look at what Starbucks does, Starbucks will change their prices, 40 cents, 30 cents every year and a half or 2 years. And by doing that, they could raise their price a penny every month and get the same effect, but that would make their customers mad at them. And every month their customers would get this jolt that would make them think about shopping somewhere else. So they hold off, they keep the price the same for a long time. Consumers know exactly what they're going to pay when they walk in their neighborhood Starbucks. Then there's this price bump, and for a couple of days the consumers are like, and then everything goes back to normal. So consumer behavior being what consumer behavior is, businesses are likely to keep their prices sticky. Why are wages sticky? Well, the most obvious reason, is that people have contracts. LeBron James has a 5-year contract with the Lakers. They know that they can't cut his pay for the next 5 years. If something happens, they're just going to have to pay him. College professors have contracts. We can get a pay cut, but again, it can't happen instantaneously. It's going to take 1.5 years or 2 years if the regents want to cut our pay. Number 2, wages may be sticky because of job search. When we get fired, we don't just grab the next job that comes along. We're going to search for a job because we hope that we're going to get a job that pays what our prior job pays. We're going to stay out there and be unemployed for a while. And as we're searching, eventually we'll be willing to take lower wages. If our search takes a long time and we can't find a job and I can't find a job and I can't find a job, but right off the bat, I'm going to be looking for a job that pays close at least to what I was making before, and that means it takes time for all those wages in the market to adjust. Then lastly, the most cool thing is what we call efficiency wage theory. In the classical world, I just cut your wages. Recession starts, I just cut everybody's wages. Well, that's silly, because really I have good workers and bad workers. And if I cut everybody's salary, the good workers are going to leave and go try to find a better job, and the bad workers are going to stay. My business is going to be hurt. Instead, what I'm likely to do when a recession starts is keep the wages high for my good workers. I'm going to try to hold on to those core workers who are really good workers. And I'm going to fire the bad workers. So I am going to cut my payroll, but instead of cutting it by lowering wages, I'm going to cut it by getting rid of people who aren't efficient. So economists believe in general, that keeping wages high, at least initially in a recession, is good for efficiency in business, and therefore wages are going to tend to be sticky. Okay. We've pointed out in the past that both Keynes and the classicals had financial markets in their theories causing recessions. But in general, you don't see financial markets running around macroeconomic theories. There's 2 theories that we need to talk about that do. One from a man named Minsky, who talked about risk in financial markets, and another one named Friedrich von Hayek, who talked about something called malinvestment. So here's a Minsky quote: "Stability leads to instability. The more stable things become and the longer they are stable, the more unstable they will be when the crisis hits." So remember that. Minsky says, the longer things are good, the worse the crash will be. So, Minsky, there's a boom. The economy booms. During that boom, savings grows better than investment does. There's more and more savings. There's more investment opportunities over time, but they're not as good. So you've got an imbalance between all this money that wants to get invested and good places to put it. That means that returns are going to fall, that where you can put your money that you're used to putting your money is going to get less and less valuable. So how do you react? Well, you take risks. And what happens is, of course, that the more stable things are for a long period of time, the more people are willing to take risk while imagining that they're not. All right? So remember, Minsky believes in Keynes, not the Keynesians, but Keynes. Animal spirits. People are affected by their animal spirits, and they don't think there's risk when in fact there is. They convince themselves that they can buy all these houses, that put all this money into the housing market, because houses never go down in price. Well, of Of course, houses go down in price, but we convince ourselves that they don't. So what happens is we get a bubble. A bubble is when prices are above equilibrium, but they keep going up. Eventually, that bubble will collapse and we'll have a crash back down, maybe even below equilibrium before we get back up to equilibrium. Recession, crash. Hayek is actually was from Germany, but belongs to a group of economists we call the Austrians. He's famous for his criticism of socialism. If you Google him or want to read him, you might want to read his criticism of socialism. It's pretty good. What Hayek says is we start off with a boom. Here's a boom. And then interest rates fall. Young Hayek said interest rates falling is a natural part of life. Old Hayek said the Federal Reserve is responsible. But you can take that either way. That fall in interest rates creates what he called malinvestment. Malinvestment means we're putting too much money into the wrong things because interest rates are too low. We can borrow money cheap, and so we're investing it in things that really we shouldn't invest it in. We're getting too much production. We're producing goods and services that we don't need. We're creating investment that we don't need. That malinvestment, that extra investment is creating a bubble, forcing prices up. Eventually, again, there'll be a crash, and in this case, that crash is going to clean out that malinvestment. One of the most interesting phenomenons that we've had is that despite the fact that that crash happened 12 years ago, as I'm standing here saying this to you, economists have not gone back to their models and really built financial markets into them. So we need to get with it. And there's a bunch of other theories out there too. One of the cool things in life in a macroeconomics world is, besides the theories we've talked about, there's post-Keynesian theories, there's Marxist theories, there's, you name it, there's a theory, there's wave theories. There's all these different theories out there, and macroeconomists, if they're smart, don't buy one line or the other. They take little pieces that they like from different things, and they paint themselves a picture. Off we go to our next topic.